Welcome back to TYT Sports. It's my honour to be joined by Andre because after he's been, how long have you been contributing now, Andre? You've been contributing for several months, and I think it's just a disgrace that we haven't been on a clip together. Jason likes to hog you and use you for all the basketball knowledge that you bring, but I never get to share any of that. So finally, we've gotten a clip together. So thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah, man, I'm honored to be here. You know, let's do something with Jason out the loop for once.
Yeah, exactly. He's out the loop and in the pool somewhere in Mexico. I think that's what he's doing. So first clip, we're going to talk about the NBA playoffs, round 2. Boston already underway with their matchup against Washington, taking a 1-0 lead. But most games haven't tipped off yet. We do want to discuss one thing. We'll start with the Western Conference. So the Golden State Warriors are going to take on the Jazz. We have to touch on the Jazz first of all because they a 4-3 victory over the Clippers. What was your initial thoughts, specifically last night? As you know, when you log on to Twitter and you see that Chris Paul's trending, Blake Griffin's trending, Doc Rivers is trending, it's never for the good reason. It's never they're never trending for something that is taking off in the Clippers. And Jason and I have talked about this throughout many clips, and I've got my own point of view as to what I think has to happen with this team, which I've voiced that Doc Rivers maybe has to go. Chris Paul might even be looking at a move elsewhere. But what do you think went wrong, again, with the Clippers with their matchup against the Jazz?
I guess when Jason and I talked about that series before it started, I picked the Clippers because I felt like, you know, coming in, both teams were healthy. And I thought both teams healthy, the Clippers were a better team. That kind of to start the year, you saw kind of the best of what the Clippers could be for about 2 or 3 weeks. You know, they were arguably the best team in the league for the first few weeks of the season. And then, like always, injuries happened, they fell apart. And I kind of feel like that's what happened this series too. Blake Griffin isn't the perfect player, but he's one of the way that Clippers team is built. Everything on offense kind of goes through Paul, Blake, and or Jordan if he cleans it up. Like there's or you know the wings are kind of non-existent unless they just happen to get hot like Jamal Crawford can. So when you take Griffin out of the equation, it makes them a little bit too one-dimensional. So if I'd have been asked again once, so when Rudy Gobert went down, I was sure the Clippers were going to win. Then he came back and Blake Griffin was out, and I was sure that the Jazz were going to win. The game itself was odd. It didn't seem like the Jazz were necessarily better. It just seemed like the Clippers weren't trying, which I wouldn't expect is what actually happened, but that's what it looked like. But ultimately, I think with the health of the squads right now, the Jazz are the better team and the one that probably should have gone through. You know, it's kind of hard to see Chris Paul in particular kind of maligned because it felt like he did everything he could this series.
Yeah, Chris Paul's frustrations were evident towards the end of the game. There was no doubt that he's definitely going through some periods at the moment where myself and Dan talked about it off camera. Like, what decision do you make? There's a lot of money on the table. Obviously, everyone in Los Angeles associated with the Clippers wants him to stay. He's the heartbeat of that team moving forward. Without him, they definitely would have to go through a rebuilding process. But I always bring up the point as to I come from a footballing background where players make decisions to go and win trophies. And when you're one of the best players, you want to win trophies, you want to win silverware. That's what Kevin Durant did. He almost made a decision that I thought was the most soccer, from my background, the most soccer-esque decision, making a move to a big team because he wanted to be known as one of the best players to have won a ring, not one of the best to not have won. So I think that Chris Paul is in a similar boat with the decision-making process. But I wanted to touch on a point that you did mention. The Clippers, what I seen there was a lot of excuses going around last season. Invalid. Chris Paul was out injured for a lot of the obviously for the playoffs. Blake Griffin has been injured. But when you look at this Utah Jazz team, Rudy Gobert was by no means 100%. He was struggling for a lot of that game. He twisted his knee, twisted his ankle at one point as well. They played a game without Gordon Hayward, who was on fire, it seemed, throughout the whole series. He had food poisoning at one point. So each team has to overcome these obstacles. They can't be used as excuses. This is why whenever I talk about basketball, I look at teams that have great depth, because depth is what's going to get you through adverse situations. That's why I think the Golden State Warriors, the most frightening team for me in the NBA at the moment, because they have depth. They have players that can come off the bench and maintain a certain standard. So with the Jazz, they were able to overcome that adversity and at least be able to play to a certain standard without some of their best players for certain parts of that game. But I feel that when the Clippers, when you remove Chris Paul for a certain period of the game, or even a DeAndre Jordan, don't you feel that the standard just has such a massive drop that they don't have enough depth in there to at least maintain a certain standard throughout?
Yeah, it's depth, and you could argue, especially if you were one to be critical of Paul or of any of their players, that their style of play almost requires them to be the focal point. You know, the Chris Paul, you know, there's this concept of kind of player portability, like what would he look like in other type of environments, or even scalability, like the way that this player plays, can it scale up to being the best on a championship team or a legendary team? And with Paul, every eye test and stat shows that he's a great player. But, you know, he has to have the ball in his hands. Like, he's the maestro. Now, he's unselfish. He'll give you assists by the dozen, but he's the decision maker. And so if you look at, I mean, he's had a long career now. You always pair him up with good front court players, you know, your Blake Griffins and DeAndre Jordans, or when, you know, back in the day, his David Wests and Tyson Chandlers, you know. Could you pair him with an elite wing that on offense wants to be able to make decisions on his own? You know, I mean, that's a question mark. And so when it comes to depth, it does feel like that's been the weakness for the Clippers for a long time. But at the same time, they've had enough talent that their depth shouldn't be that bad, right?
Yeah.
Like with Paul, Griffin, and Jordan, that's 2 All-NBA and 1 borderline All-NBA players. Jordan was on the Olympic team, so I mean, he's an elite player. If you have 3 elite players, and then guys like JJ Redick doesn't suck. Yeah. You know, like Jason likes to say, Jamal Crawford's the best player in the NBA. You know, he's not that, but he doesn't suck. You know, they have players besides their big 3 that should be able to contribute. And the fact that every year something goes wrong, that's not a good thing when you start looking at like legacies and historical cases and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that Jason has the funny effect of jinxing players sometimes, because I think as soon as he said that Jamal Crawford was one of his favorite players and one of the best, he didn't have the best series throughout. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, when he says that Austin Rivers is one of the worst, Austin Rivers came out of nowhere. Specifically in Game 6, this guy was draining threes. You know, it was remarkable to see that. But I do want to move over to what, in my opinion, Andre, is the most exciting matchup of round 2 in the playoffs, and that's the Rockets versus the Spurs. My appetite, my palate is wet. I'm waiting to see what this game has in store, because what I seen from the Rockets against OKC was remarkable. I thought that the Rockets, and Jason and I have talked about how Mike D'Antonio has done a fantastic job this season getting this offense so high-powered, so frightening to watch at times, high tempo, on the front foot most of the time. And I think that part of the reason why it was such an amazing matchup between the Rockets and OKC, not only because you've got 2 of the best players in the league, 2 MVP candidates going head-to-head, is that it really, in my opinion, we just talked about depth. It showed how much depth the Rockets have outside of James Harden when they need to. Beverly was phenomenal at times. You had players stepping up that were able to really push that team to the next level and elevate James Harden's game through that. So when I witnessed that, it really had me step back and think, this is going to be a very, very tough task for the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs had a great matchup as well against the Grizzlies. Dan and I were talking about how it was a matchup that many expected to be kind of just simple day at the office for the Spurs. Going a decent Grizzlies team. Mike Conley's a good player. They've got some good talent, but they expected him to take care of business. But the Grizzlies caused them a lot of problems until the likes of Kawhi Leonard shows how clutch he can be. Tony Parker rolling back the years in their last game. So what are you looking forward to most in that matchup? And what do you think, or who do you think has the edge when you look at both of these teams in their prior matchup?
Yeah, to me, this is one of the 2. There's 4 series in the second round. I think I would be utterly flabbergasted if either the Cavs or the Warriors lose.
Yeah.
So the other 2 series are the ones that seem like they're competitive. And I agree with you. I really am looking forward to this Rockets and Spurs. Because I'm looking forward to it and it's so interesting, it's hard to make a definitive prediction. I will say the first round of the playoffs for both teams went almost exactly like I expected. I think in our TYT predictions, I think I said the Rockets in 6 and the Spurs in 6.
Nice.
And it went 5 and 6. The thing with the Spurs and the Grizzlies, I wasn't surprised that series looked like that because, and I think I said it before and I'll say it again, like nobody likes playing the Grizzlies.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not a fun team to play. Like they're big. They beat on you. They're
Yeah.
Gasol and Zach Randolph, nobody wants to defend them in the middle. And then Mike Conley showed what he's maybe been showing more and more over the last couple of years, that he really is an elite point guard in the league, even if he doesn't get as much attention as others. So, so that series went about like I thought it was going to go. I do still have question marks about the Spurs as a playoff team, kind of in the post Duncan, Parker, Ginobili era.
Yeah.
Obviously, Parker and Ginobili are still there, but they're not what they used to be. But they used to have an extra gear. Like they were a great regular season team that, due to kind of the brilliance of Duncan and Ginobili in particular, could step it up when called upon in the playoffs. I don't know if I've seen a lot of that. And, like over the last few years, that it seems like they've become a high-ranked team that it's not shocking to see them get upset. Maybe this year because, they've seen Kawhi come into his own. Maybe he can be that next gear for them that they didn't have before. I've seen analysis of this particular series pointing out that in a lot of ways the Spurs on paper are a nightmare matchup to the Rockets because the Spurs give up what's the least or the second least amount of three-pointers in the league. They don't foul, which is what James Harden's game is based on. And so they should be built to give this Rockets team trouble. But to your point, as you pointed out earlier, this Rockets team is redundantly good on offense, which is a good thing. That speaks to their depth. They are built obviously around James Harden, but this is, they call it Daryl Morey Dork Elvis, or at least the sports guy did.
Yeah.
This is a Dork Elvis team. Like he built a team where everybody is a shooter, and then their big men are role players. If you took the analytics and said, okay, well, how would you build a team to maximize if the three-pointer is the best shot? Let's maximize it. They built on that, and then they added in redundancy because Harden is an MVP level guy. Lou Williams and Eric Gordon are at least impact starter level shooting guards, and they are all in the same mix. So I kind of feel like at the end of the day, if I was picking now, and this might be my heart because I've been on this Rockets bandwagon since the start of this season. I was writing articles about how Harden and D'Antoni were a match made in heaven. I picked Harden as my preseason MVP. So maybe I will say the Rockets in 7.
Wow.
But and maybe that's me trying to be bold because I think the Spurs are probably the favorite. But the Rockets' oppressive offense, I don't see the Spurs defense as being oppressive anymore. So at the end of the day, I'll go ahead and give them my pick for now.
Well, I love the bold pick. I think that I personally think I'm going to go for the Spurs in 6, but I get exactly where you're coming from, specifically with what that high-powered offense and the fact that the Spurs. There was some points that the Grizzlies highlighted how weak they can be transitionally on defense, and I think the only thing that I'm going to mention why I will favor the Spurs really quick before we move over to the last couple of matchups is I'm expecting to see more from LaMarcus Aldridge, like we did last year in the playoffs. We were talking about it all throughout the year. People were questioning how he was going to fit into Pop's system. And then it was almost as if Pop just let him off the leash in the playoffs last year, and he was dropping 38 points, 40 points. He didn't do enough against the Grizzlies. That's obvious. There needs to be more. But when you watch the Rockets versus the Spurs in the regular season, they put Trevor Ariza on LaMarcus Aldridge, and LaMarcus Aldridge is able to bully him, able to find a lot of space. And I think with what will begin to happen is you'll start to see Kawhi Leonard, as we know, will be guarded maybe the time by Anderson. Who knows what's going to happen with their defense. But I think he's going to try to utilize LaMarcus Aldridge a lot more so. And if he can get on the board and he starts to get his confidence high, I feel that he could cause a real problem for the Rockets in and around the paint if he's able to do what we know he can do and work on that moving forward. But we want to touch on the last one. I know we could be here all day specifically talking about the NBA playoffs round 2. I'm on board with you. I know the Jazz fans might feel that we've let them down by not touching on their chances against the Golden State Warriors, and the Raptors deserve a lot of credit for being able to overcome a tough matchup against the Bucks, and it was one that we TYT Sports had scrutinised the Raptors a lot because I felt like they let themselves down throughout that series a lot, but were able to overcome adversity. But the Celtics and the Wizards is another matchup that has me glued to the TV because you get two exciting point guards going up against each other. You've got a team in the Celtics that had the 1 seed, but they struggled a lot of the time against the Bulls. How do you see that series going? I'm interested to know if you think that the Celtics will have enough to put the Wizards to the sword. They're 1-0 up already.
Yeah, so just really quickly, I feel like I should mention the Raptors as you did. That in our first round previews, I think Jason got the whole country of Canada angry at him because he picked the Bucks, and I think he did so because he liked the Greek Freak, and I kind of went with the chalk, and I figured the Raptors would pull it out. I was shocked. I thought that Lowry would be better. I don't know how injured his back is. I'm hoping he's better to make it at least interesting against the Cavs. But anyway, enough of them. To your question, the Celtics and the Wizards, I think that this playoffs has been really interesting in the East because the gap between the 1 seed and the 8 seed was so small. Celtics had the best record, but again, I think before we looked at kind of the margins of victories in the regular season, there was hardly any gap between them and the Bulls, let alone them and the Wizards. And so it doesn't feel like a 1-4 matchup. It feels more like a 4-5 or 2-3. Like they're really evenly matched. I do think the Celtics can win, or will win, I should say. I thought that before yesterday, and then yesterday kind of helped solidify it. I think that the Wizards' strength is their backcourt offense, right? John Wall. Nobody can do anything with him. And Bradley Beal has really stepped up as a scorer in the postseason. But they're outside of those two, they don't have a lot that's intimidating. Marcin Gortat can do like he did the first half yesterday and just go crazy, but then he can also disappear for 2 games. Same with Otto Porter. Same with Markieff Morris. So when I look at the Celtics, I feel like in Isaiah, they kind of have a bit of a answer, at least as far as an offensive point guard, to match up with John Wall. But then, they've got guys like Avery Bradley and Marcus Smart to make life difficult on those perimeter players for the Wizards. And then Al Horford is I always thought he was kind of one of the underrated free agent signings because he doesn't put up mega numbers, but I thought he was going to be a really key piece for them. And he didn't have the regular season I expected, but in the playoffs so far, he is kind of what I thought he would be. He is who I thought he was. But yeah, so for that reason, I feel like the Celtics are a bit better from top to bottom. I wouldn't be surprised if the Wizards take a couple. I feel like the Celtics win this in 5 or 6. 7 at the outside. I would pick 6. It's interesting. We keep picking the last game to be a road team win.
Yeah,
I'm picking the Rockets in 7 and all that stuff. But I feel like the Celtics are the better team, and they win it in 6 plus or minus 1 game.
All right. Well, that's pretty much most of it broken down. I think definitely a pleasure to finally get on camera with you, Andre, and get to hear your insight into this. So the Raptors take on the Cavs tonight, I believe. The Rockets Spurs also tonight. And then we have the first game of the Jazz versus Warriors series tomorrow, and then we'll make sure to kind of bring you guys more of a recap on that. But stay tuned for another clip coming with myself and Andre. We're going to discuss the free agents that are going to be available as we go into the next season and who perhaps increased their stock, who made things a little harder for themselves based on their performance this year. But make sure to check out Andre. All the stuff for social media will be in the description below. We'll see you guys again very soon.